The baobab trees cast long shadows across the dusty village paths, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like ancient guardians of forgotten secrets. In the smallest hut at the edge of the settlement, young Adira sat beside her grandmother, her eyes wide with anticipation. The evening light filtered through the thatched roof, casting a golden glow on the worn mud walls that seemed to pulse with untold stories. Grandmother Zara's hands were weathered, each line and crease a testament to years of hard work and wisdom. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the ground as she began to speak, her voice soft yet carrying the weight of generations. "Every great journey begins with a single moment of curiosity," she murmured, her eyes meeting Adira's with an intensity that made the young girl lean forward. The wind outside seemed to whisper, carrying with it the first hints of an adventure that would change everything. Adira didn't know it yet, but the story her grandmother was about to tell would ignite a spark within her, a spark that would transform not just her life, but the entire destiny of their village. As the first rays of dawn broke through the morning mist, Adira could not shake the vivid dreams that had visited her during the night. Images of a hidden cave, mysterious spirits, and a treasure that gleamed with an otherworldly light danced behind her eyes. The story her grandmother had shared was more than just a tale. It felt like a calling. The village was already awakening. Children ran between the huts, elders prepared for their daily tasks, and the rhythmic sounds of morning preparations filled the air. But Adira was different. While others moved with familiar routine, she stood apart, her mind racing with the possibilities of the legend she had heard. Her father, a skilled carpenter, noticed the unusual intensity in his daughter's gaze. "What troubles you, my child?" he asked, his strong hands pausing in their work of carving a new wooden frame. Adira looked up, a determination burning in her eyes that spoke of adventures yet to come, of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. The village elder, a man named Kibo with skin like weathered leather and eyes that seemed to see beyond the immediate world, watched Adira with a knowing smile. He had seen that look before, the unmistakable spark of a true adventurer, someone destined to walk paths unknown. "To seek a treasure is not about finding gold," Kibo told her that morning, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emerge from the very earth beneath their feet. "True treasure lies in the journey, in the wisdom gained, in the challenges overcome." His words were both a warning and an encouragement, a subtle test of the young girl's resolve. Adira's preparation was methodical. She gathered supplies with a precision that belied her young age. A small knife her father had crafted, a water gourd her mother had woven, a map sketched by her grandmother on a piece of weathered bark. Each item was chosen not just for its practical use, but for the story and love it carried. The forest greeted Adira like a living entity, its branches creating a canopy that filtered sunlight into emerald green patterns on the forest floor. Each step she took was careful, deliberate, her bare feet finding paths between twisted roots and moss-covered stones. The sounds of the forest were not silent, but a complex symphony of rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the soft whispers of life that moved just beyond her vision. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Listen to the forest, child. It speaks in languages older than words." Adira understood this now. The forest was not just a place to pass through, but a living guide, offering subtle directions and hidden wisdom to those patient enough to understand its language. She noticed how certain branches seemed to bend, how particular patches of light seemed to illuminate specific paths. By midday, the heat had become intense, and Adira found a small clearing where a clear stream cut through the landscape. She rested, filling her water gourd and eating the dried fruit and seeds she had packed. But even in rest, her senses remained alert, understanding that the forest was always watching, always testing those who dared to journey through its domain. It was the tortoise who found her first, not the other way around. An ancient creature, its shell etched with markings that seemed more like a map than mere natural patterns, it approached Adira with a deliberate slowness that spoke of infinite patience. Its eyes, deep and knowing, held a wisdom that transcended its seemingly simple form. "You seek something," the tortoise said, its voice a low, gravelly sound that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Adira was not surprised by the talking animal. In her village, stories of magical encounters were as common as the morning bread. She nodded, explaining her quest for the hidden treasure and the knowledge that might save her village. The tortoise listened, its ancient head tilting slightly, evaluating the young girl. Then it spoke again, each word carefully chosen. Wisdom is not found, young one. It is earned. Each step you take, each challenge you face, will teach you more than any treasure ever could. And with that cryptic advice, it began to draw something in the dirt, a map that was both literal and metaphorical, showing Adira that her true journey was as much internal as external. The river was not merely water, but a living challenge. Its currents were strong, its depths unpredictable, and its surface deceptively calm. Adira stood at its bank, understanding that crossing would be her first true test. The tortoise's teachings were fresh in her mind: patience, observation, understanding. She studied the river's flow, noting the places where rocks broke the surface, where the current seemed gentler, where hidden dangers might lurk beneath the seemingly tranquil water. Her approach was methodical. She gathered vine-like plants, weaving them into a rope that could serve as both support and guidance. Her hands moved with a skill that surprised even herself, a testament to the practical teachings of her village. As she began to cross, the river seemed to test her. Currents pulled at her legs, stones became slippery, and the water's temperature shifted from icy cold to unexpectedly warm. But Adira remembered the tortoise's words about earning wisdom. Each step was a negotiation, a dance between her determination and the river's wild spirit. As the forest began to change, transforming from dense woodland to a more open landscape of scattered trees and rocky outcroppings, Adira encountered her next challenge. A monkey, unlike any she had seen before, perched on a branch with an intelligence that seemed to sparkle in its eyes. Its fur was a mix of silver and deep brown, and around its neck hung a necklace of intricate knots and unusual stones. "Stop," the monkey called out, not as a command, but as an invitation to a game. "To pass this way, you must answer a riddle that has confounded travelers for generations." Its voice was playful, yet there was an underlying tone of serious purpose. Adira understood immediately that this was no ordinary encounter, but another test on her journey of wisdom and understanding. The monkey's riddle was complex, a linguistic puzzle that required not just quick thinking, but deep introspection. "I am not alive, but I grow," it began, its tail swinging in a rhythmic pattern that seemed to pulse with the very essence of the challenge. Adira closed her eyes, allowing the words to dance around her mind, understanding that the answer lay not in the surface meaning, but in the deeper truth hidden beneath. Night fell quickly in this part of the world, and Adira learned to build her fire with the skills her father had taught her. But this was no ordinary campfire. As the flames rose, they seemed to take on a life of their own, casting shadows that danced with stories of their own. The monkey watched from a nearby branch, its earlier riddle still hanging in the air like a persistent melody. Her solution came not through direct thought, but through a moment of intuitive clarity. "A fire," she answered to the monkey, her voice steady and sure. "You are not alive, but you grow. You need fuel to exist. You can be both gentle and destructive, and you spread like a living thing, yet you are not alive." The monkey's laughter rang out, a sound of pure joy and recognition. As a reward for solving the riddle, the monkey shared with her a small pouch of seeds, each one, it explained, containing the potential for an entire forest. "Wisdom is like these seeds," the monkey told her. Small and seemingly insignificant, but holding within them the potential to create entire worlds of understanding. The mountains rose before Adira like ancient guardians, their peaks touching clouds that seemed to hold secrets older than time itself. Her journey had transformed her. No longer was she the young girl who had left her village, but a traveler who understood that every step was a lesson, every challenge a teacher. The ascent was grueling. Rocks that seemed stable would suddenly shift, winds would change direction without warning, and the thin air made each breath a conscious effort. But Adira had learned from the tortoise about patience, from the monkey about perspective, and from the forest about listening to something larger than herself. Halfway up the mountain, she discovered a small cave. Not as a place of shelter, but as another classroom of her journey. The cave walls were covered in ancient drawings, stories of travelers before her, of quests similar to her own, of wisdom passed down through generations. She realized then that her journey was not just her own, but part of a larger narrative of human experience and understanding. As dawn broke, Adira found herself at a literal and metaphorical crossroads. 3 paths stretched before her. One smooth and easy, one rocky and challenging, and one that seemed to disappear and reappear like a mirage. The monkey's seeds hung from her belt, the tortoise's wisdom echoed in her mind, and the forest's lessons whispered in her heart. This was more than a physical choice of direction. It was a moment of profound personal decision, a test of everything she had learned. Each path represented a different approach to her quest: the easy path of least resistance, the challenging path of growth, and the mysterious path of intuition and unknown potential. Her hand touched the pouch of seeds. They seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, a reminder that potential lies not in the path chosen, but in how one walks that path. Adira took a deep breath, understanding that the true treasure of her quest was not something to be found, but something to be discovered within herself. The winds seemed to have a language of their own, carrying stories from distant lands, secrets from forgotten mountains, and echoes of journeys long past. Adira learned to listen not just with her ears, but with every fiber of her being. The path she had chosen was neither the easiest nor the most obvious, but it resonated with a truth she was only beginning to understand. Each gust told a story. Some were gentle, carrying the fragrance of distant flowers and the soft memories of peaceful valleys. Others were fierce, filled with the raw power of storms and the untamed spirit of wild places. Adira realized that wisdom was not about finding a single, unchanging truth, but about understanding the complexity of existence, the constant dance of change and perspective. As the day progressed, the winds became her companions, sometimes pushing her forward, sometimes challenging her to find her own strength. They were not kind, nor were they cruel. They simply were, teaching Adira that true resilience comes from adapting to what cannot be controlled, not from fighting against it. It was in a small, rocky valley that Adira encountered the snake, a creature of such remarkable intelligence that it seemed to blur the line between animal and mystical being. Its scales shimmered with colors that seemed to change depending on the light, and its eyes held a depth of knowledge that was both inviting and intimidating. Knowledge and wisdom are not the same, the snake said, its voice a soft, sliding sound that seemed to emerge from the very stones around them. It began to weave a complex tale, not with words, but with a series of movements that told a story of transformation, of shedding old skins, of understanding that growth requires letting go. Adira watched, entranced. The snake's lesson was about adaptability, about the courage to change, to reinvent oneself. Just as the snake could shed its skin and emerge renewed, so too could a person transform their understanding, their perspective, their very essence of being. The valley appeared suddenly, as if it had been waiting for just this moment. Lush and green, it was a stark contrast to the rocky terrain Adira had been traversing. Waterfalls cascaded from cliffs that seemed to touch the sky, and vegetation grew with an abundance that spoke of some hidden magic. But Adira had learned enough to know that beauty was often a test, not a gift. The valley's perfection was almost too complete, too precise. She moved carefully, her steps deliberate, understanding that true wisdom meant approaching beauty with the same caution one might approach a challenge. Strange flowers grew here, plants that seemed to turn their heads to watch her, that seemed to breathe with a consciousness of their own. The seeds from the monkey hung at her belt, and she realized they were vibrating softly, as if in conversation with this magical place. A pool of water sat at the center of the valley, so still that it seemed more like a mirror than a natural body of water. Adira approached it not to drink, but to understand. Her reflection looked back at her, but it was more than just a simple image. It showed her not as she was, but as she could be, filled with potential, with strength, with a wisdom that went beyond her years. The snake's lesson of transformation, the monkey's riddle about potential, the tortoise's teachings of patience, they all converged in this moment. Adira understood that the treasure she sought was not an object, but a state of being. It was about becoming, about the journey of continuous learning and growth. Around the pool, the plants seemed to lean in, as if listening. The winds continued their eternal dance, and the distant mountains watched with the patience of millennia. Adira realized that she was both the seeker and the sought, the journey and the destination. As the day began to fade, Adira found herself at another crucial point in her journey. The valley seemed to breathe around her, a living entity that had been waiting, perhaps for generations, for someone who could truly see and understand its magic. The seeds at her belt had begun to glow with a soft, internal light. She understood now that the treasure was not something to be found, but something to be understood. It was a state of wisdom, of connection, of understanding the intricate web that connected all living things. The journey had transformed her more profoundly than any physical change could describe. The snake, the monkey, the tortoise, they were not just guides, but reflections of different aspects of wisdom. Patience, playfulness, adaptability, transformation, these were the true treasures. And Adira was ready to carry them back to her village, to share not gold or jewels, but something far more precious. The entrance to the cave appeared as if carved by intention rather than natural forces. Its mouth was framed by stones that seemed to have been carefully placed, creating an archway that felt more like a threshold between worlds than a simple geological formation. Adira approached with the caution of someone who understood that every space holds its own spirit, its own story. Inside, the cave was not dark, but filled with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emerge from the very walls themselves. Crystals embedded in the rock face caught and reflected light in patterns that told stories older than human memory. Each step Adira took created ripples of sound, echoes that seemed to carry whispers of countless journeys that had come before her. The walls were alive with paintings, not just drawings, but living memories captured in stone. Scenes of villages, of journeys, of moments of profound connection and transformation danced across the rocky surface. Adira realized she was walking through a library of human experience, each image a chapter in the endless story of wisdom and understanding. From the shadows emerged the spirit her grandmother had spoken of, a being of such remarkable fluidity that it seemed to exist between states of being. One moment it was a wisp of smoke, the next a figure of shifting light, then something that resembled a person, yet was clearly something more. To pass, the spirit said, its voice a harmony of multiple tones. You must understand the nature of truth. The challenge was not physical, but a test of perception, of understanding that reality is far more complex than it first appears. The spirit began to change rapidly, becoming a child, an elder, an animal, a force of nature. Each transformation a question, each shift a riddle. Adira remembered the lessons of the tortoise's patience, the monkey's perspective, the snake's adaptability. She stood still, not trying to chase or understand each transformation, but to see the essence that remained constant beneath the changing surface. The spirit's challenge was unlike anything Adira had encountered. Riddles materialized in the air, hanging like luminous threads. Some were in languages she did not know. Others were mathematical puzzles. Some were visual representations that seemed to change as she looked at them. What is constant? The spirit asked. What remains when all else changes? The riddles were not meant to be solved with a single answer, but to be experienced, to be understood through a deeper form of comprehension that went beyond mere intellectual understanding. Adira closed her eyes. The seeds from the monkey hung at her belt. The memory of the tortoise's wisdom echoed in her mind. The snake's lesson of transformation vibrated in her very being. She understood that the answer was not about finding a single truth, but about embracing the complexity of existence. The cave opened into a chamber that defied description. It was both a physical space and something more, a representation of collective wisdom, of the interconnected nature of all experience. Floating in the center was not a physical treasure, but a manifestation of pure understanding. Images from her entire journey swirled around her. The tortoise's patient teachings, the monkey's playful riddles, the snake's transformative lessons, the wind's stories, the hidden valley's magic. They were not separate experiences, but threads of a single, complex tapestry of wisdom. Adira understood then that the treasure was not something to be taken, but something to be shared. It was a state of being, a way of understanding the world that saw beyond surface appearances, that recognized the profound connection between all living things. As if the entire journey had been preparing her for this single moment, Adira felt a profound shift in her understanding. The treasure was not gold, not a physical object, but the wisdom she had gathered, the understanding she had cultivated. Each challenge, each encounter had been a piece of a larger puzzle. The spirit of the cave seemed to smile, not with a mouth, but with an essence of recognition. "You have found what you sought," it said, though no words were actually spoken. The seeds at her belt began to glow, the memories of her journey crystallizing into a form of knowledge that was both deeply personal and universally applicable. She was ready to return to her village, not as the same girl who had left, but as a bearer of a treasure far more valuable than any material wealth. The wisdom of connection, of understanding, of seeing the deeper patterns that connect all of existence. This was the true gift she would bring home. The path of return was both familiar and entirely new. Landscapes that had seemed challenging before now appeared as old friends, each terrain a testament to the journey she had undertaken. Adira moved differently now. Her steps were lighter, her awareness more expansive, her understanding of the world fundamentally altered. The seeds from the monkey now seemed to pulse with a living energy, creating small patterns of light that danced around her as she walked. They were more than simple seeds now. They had become a physical manifestation of the wisdom she had gathered. Each one contained stories, lessons, entire worlds of understanding that she knew would transform her village. Her body bore the marks of her journey, not scars, but subtle changes. Her eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences beyond words. Her movements carried a grace that came from understanding the interconnectedness of all things. She was no longer just Adira from the village, but a bearer of a profound, transformative wisdom. As her village came into view, Adira realized that her journey had been about more than personal transformation. The wisdom she carried was not just for herself, but for her entire community. The challenges she had faced, the tortoise's patience, the monkey's perspective, the snake's adaptability, the shape-shifting spirit's complex riddles, were lessons that could heal and grow an entire community. The landscape around her village seemed to recognize her return. Trees swayed in a welcome dance. The wind carried whispers of anticipation. The very earth seemed to pulse with an understanding of the profound change she was bringing. Her journey was not just a personal quest, but a collective awakening. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. True treasure is not found, but understood. Adira now comprehended the deep truth of those words. The treasure was a way of seeing, of understanding, of connecting, something far more valuable than any material wealth. News of her return spread quickly, not through words, but through an almost mystical sense of anticipation. Children stopped their play, elders looked up from their tasks, and a collective breath seemed to be held in suspension. Adira walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen beyond the visible world. Kibbo, the village elder, was the first to truly see her. Not as the young girl who had left months ago, but as a transformed being, a carrier of wisdom. His eyes, which had always held a depth of understanding, now looked at her with a mixture of pride and recognition. He understood that she had become something more than anyone had anticipated. The seeds she carried began to manifest their magic. Where she walked, small plants would sprout, not just ordinary plants, but those that seemed to carry within them the lessons of her journey. Plants of resilience, of adaptability, of interconnected growth. The village would quite literally grow with the wisdom she had gathered. That evening, the entire village gathered. It was not a formal meeting, but an organic coming together, drawn by an inexplicable sense that something profound was about to be shared. Adira stood at the center, not as a speaker but as a conduit of understanding. She did not tell stories of her journey in the traditional sense. Instead, she shared experiences, moments of insight, lessons learned, ways of seeing that transformed understanding. The tortoise's patience, the monkey's perspective, the snake's ability to transform, the spirit's complex riddles, these became living teachings that people could feel, rather than simply hear. The children listened with a concentration beyond their years. The elders recognized the depth of wisdom being shared. Even the animals of the village seemed to be part of this collective awakening, sensing the profound shift in consciousness. As night fell, the village was different. It was not just a collection of huts and people, but a living, breathing entity of collective understanding. The seeds Adira had brought continued to grow, creating gardens that were more than agricultural spaces. They were living libraries of wisdom, each plant a reminder of a lesson learned. Adira understood now that the true treasure was not something to be hoarded, but something to be lived, to be shared, to be continuously understood and re-understood. Her journey had been about becoming a vessel of wisdom, a bridge between the known and the unknown. The moonlight cast a soft glow over the village, and for the first time, everyone seemed to see not just with their eyes, but with a deeper, more profound sense of understanding. The treasure had been found, and it was transforming everything. In the weeks following Adira's return, the village began to change in ways both subtle and profound. It was as if her journey had planted seeds of transformation that were now taking root in every aspect of community life. The way people spoke to one another shifted, conversations became deeper, more intentional, filled with a newfound understanding of connection. Children began to approach learning differently. No longer were lessons confined to simple memorization, but became explorations of understanding. They would sit with the elders, not just to hear stories, but to engage in dialogues that bridged generations. The seeds Adira had brought continued to grow, creating gardens that were living metaphors of growth, adaptation, and interconnectedness. Kibbo observed these changes with a mixture of wonder and recognition. He understood that true wisdom was not something that could be taught, but something that had to be experienced, lived, and shared. Adira had become more than just a traveler. She was now a living bridge between the known and the unknown. The gardens that sprouted from Adira's magical seeds became the heart of the village's transformation. These were not ordinary gardens, but living libraries of wisdom. Each plant seemed to carry within it the lessons of her journey. The tortoise's patience manifest in slow-growing, resilient herbs, the monkey's playful perspective reflected in vibrant, unexpected flower combinations, the snake's ability to transform evident in plants that changed with the seasons in remarkable ways. Healers from the village discovered that these plants carried a different kind of medicine. It was not just about physical healing, but about healing of the spirit of understanding. Medicines prepared from these gardens seemed to address not just symptoms, but the root causes of illness, addressing the deeper imbalances in body, mind, and community. Young people began to see the gardens as more than just agricultural spaces. They became places of learning, of meditation, of understanding the profound connections between all living things. Each plant told a story, each growth pattern a lesson in resilience and adaptation. Strange and wonderful things began to happen in the village. People started to communicate in ways that went beyond words. A look could convey entire conversations. A gesture could bridge misunderstandings that would have previously divided the community. The barriers between individuals seemed to soften, revealing the intricate web of connection that had always existed but had gone unnoticed. The animals of the village changed too. They moved differently, seemed to interact with humans with a new level of understanding. Chickens would pause and seem to listen during conversations. Dogs would guide lost children home with an almost supernatural sense of purpose. It was as if Adira's journey had awakened a collective consciousness that extended beyond human perception. Grandmother Zara, who had first told Adira the story that sparked her journey, watched these changes with a knowing smile. She understood that true wisdom was not about accumulating knowledge, but about opening oneself to the vast, interconnected nature of existence. Adira herself became a different kind of teacher. She did not stand at the front of gatherings and lecture, but moved among people, asking questions, listening deeply, helping others to discover their own path of understanding. Her wisdom was not about providing answers, but about helping others find their own questions. Young people from neighboring villages began to come, drawn by stories of the transformed community. They would sit with Adira, not to be taught, but to learn how to learn. She would often take them to the gardens, show them how to listen to the plants, to understand the subtle languages of growth and adaptation. The treasure she had sought was now clearly understood. It was not a thing to be found, but a way of being, a continuous process of growth, of understanding, of recognizing the profound connections that exist beneath the surface of everyday life. As seasons passed, the village became known far and wide as a place of extraordinary wisdom. But it was not a wisdom of books or scholarly learning, but a living, breathing understanding that touched every aspect of community life. Children grew with a sense of connection to the world around them. Elders found new purpose in sharing their experiences, and the very landscape seemed to pulse with a different kind of energy. Adira understood that her journey was never truly complete. Each day was another opportunity to learn, to grow, to understand. The treasure she had sought was a continuous unfolding, a never-ending story of discovery and connection. The seeds continued to grow, the gardens continued to teach, and the village continued to transform, a living testament to the power of wisdom, of understanding, of seeing the world not as a collection of separate things, but as a profound, interconnected web of existence. Years passed, and the village became more than a settlement. It was a living testament to the power of wisdom and collective understanding. Travelers came from distant lands, not as tourists, but as seekers. They were drawn by stories of a community that had discovered something profound about the nature of existence, of learning, of connection. Adira had transformed from the young girl who had left on a quest to a guide, a bridge between worlds. Her hair had streaks of silver now. Her eyes held the depth of countless journeys, both physical and spiritual. She understood that wisdom was not about accumulation, but about continuous flow, about being a conduit of understanding. The gardens that had begun with her magical seeds had now spread beyond the village boundaries. They were not just agricultural spaces, but living laboratories of understanding, where the principles of growth, adaptation, and interconnectedness were explored and lived daily. Travelers brought stories from distant places, and the village listened. Not with a narrow perspective of judging or comparing, but with a deep curiosity that sought to understand. Each story was a thread in a larger tapestry of human experience, each narrative a lesson to be explored, understood, integrated. Young people from the village began to travel, not to conquer or explore in the traditional sense, but as carriers of the wisdom they had learned. They moved with a different kind of awareness, understanding that every interaction was an opportunity for mutual learning, every encounter a chance to see the world from a new perspective. The lessons of the tortoise's patience, the monkey's perspective, the snake's transformation continued to resonate. But now they were not just individual teachings, but a collective way of being, an approach to life that saw beyond surface differences to the fundamental connections that bind all existence. A new structure emerged in the village, not a traditional building, but a living, breathing space of collective memory and understanding. It was part garden, part gathering place, part school. Here, knowledge was not something to be stored, but something to be experienced, shared, continuously reimagined. The walls of this space were alive with stories, not just written words, but living murals that seemed to shift and change, reflecting the dynamic nature of understanding. Children would sit here, not to be lectured, but to engage in dialogues that span generations, cultures, and ways of perceiving the world. Adira understood that the treasure she had sought was now a collective inheritance. It was no longer her personal journey, but a way of being that had taken root in an entire community that was now spreading beyond their immediate boundaries. Strange and wonderful phenomena continued to occur. Communication happened in ways that defied traditional understanding. A look could convey entire histories. A gesture could heal long-standing misunderstandings. The barriers between individual beings, human, animal, plant, seemed to become more permeable, more fluid. Scientists and scholars began to visit, drawn by reports of this extraordinary community. But they quickly discovered that what was happening here could not be understood through traditional methods of observation and analysis. This was a different kind of knowing, a way of understanding that was more about experience than measurement. The seeds that Adira had brought continued to manifest their magic. They were more than plants now. They were living repositories of collective wisdom, each one a story, a lesson, a way of understanding the profound interconnectedness of all things. As Adira entered her elder years, she understood more profoundly than ever that the journey was never about reaching a destination. It was about the continuous process of becoming, of understanding, of opening oneself to the vast, mysterious nature of existence. Young people would sit with her, not to hear stories of her past journey, but to learn how to approach their own paths of discovery. She would often take them to the gardens, show them how to listen to the plants, to understand the subtle languages of growth and adaptation. The treasure she had sought was now clearly a living, breathing entity, not something to be possessed, but something to be continuously experienced, shared, understood. Each day was another opportunity to learn, to grow, to see the world with new eyes. As the world around the village continued to change, the wisdom Adira had brought remained a constant, flowing like an underground river of understanding. Her personal memories began to blend with the collective memory of the community, becoming something larger than any individual story. Children would gather around the eldest members of the community, not just to hear stories, but to participate in a living dialogue of understanding. They learned that memory was not a fixed thing, but a living, breathing entity that could be explored, questioned, reimagined. The stories of Adira's journey became more than a personal narrative. They became a collective mythology, a way of understanding the world that transcended individual experience. The magical seeds continued their extraordinary growth, creating gardens that were living archives of wisdom. Each plant seemed to carry within it not just botanical information, but entire narratives of transformation, adaptation, and interconnectedness. Beyond the village, the world was experiencing its own transformations. Other communities began to hear about the extraordinary place where wisdom was lived rather than simply studied. Scholars, philosophers, healers, and seekers began to make pilgrimages, drawn by stories that seemed to defy traditional understanding. But those who came expecting to find a simple solution or a definitive answer quickly discovered that this was not a place of easy answers. It was a community of continuous inquiry, of perpetual learning. The wisdom here was not something to be captured or contained, but something to be experienced, something that shifted and changed with each interaction. Adira, now an elder with eyes that held the depth of countless journeys, understood that true wisdom was about maintaining a state of perpetual curiosity. She would often remind the younger generations that the moment one believes they have found the ultimate truth is the moment they stop truly learning. Extraordinary connections began to manifest in ways that challenged traditional understanding. Farmers discovered that their crops grew differently when they approached cultivation not as a mechanical process, but as a dialogue with the living world. Healers found that their treatments were more effective when they understood illness not as something to be fought, but as a communication from the body's deeper wisdom. The animals of the region seemed to have changed too. They moved with a different awareness, interacting with humans in ways that suggested a deeper level of communication. Birds would bring seeds from distant lands. Insects would create intricate patterns that seemed to hold hidden meanings, and the very landscape appeared to pulse with a kind of living intelligence. Kibo, the elder who had first recognized the potential in young Adira, would often sit and observe these transformations. He understood that what was happening was more than a local phenomenon. It was a fundamental shift in how beings understood their connection to the world. As global challenges began to mount, environmental changes, social tensions, technological disruptions, the village became a beacon of hope. Not through grand declarations or complex solutions, but through a way of being that demonstrated a profound alternative to the fragmented, competitive approaches that dominated much of the world. Young people from the village began to travel, not as missionaries or teachers, but as listeners. They would go to different communities, different cultures, approaching each encounter with the deep curiosity and respect they had learned in their unique home. They carried with them not a fixed ideology, but a way of approaching understanding, patient, adaptive, deeply respectful of the complexity of existence. The magical gardens continued to be a source of wonder and learning. Scientists who studied them found that they defied traditional botanical understanding. Plants seemed to communicate in ways that went beyond chemical signals, exhibiting a form of intelligence that challenged existing scientific paradigms. Seasons passed, generations came and went, but the essence of what Adira had brought back from her original journey remained constant. It was no longer about her individual story, but about a way of being that had taken root in an entire community that was now spreading like seeds carried on the wind. Adira herself had become more of a living legend than a physical presence. Her actual body had aged, but her spirit seemed to permeate everything. The way people spoke, the way they learned, the way they approached challenges, the way they understood their connection to the world around them. The treasure she had sought was now clearly understood as something far more profound than any material wealth. It was a way of seeing, of understanding, of existing that recognized the profound interconnectedness of all things. Each moment was an opportunity for learning, for growth, for understanding. The ripple effects of the village's transformation began to reach corners of the world that had long seemed distant and disconnected. The stories of Adira's wisdom, the living gardens, and the profound way of being had taken on lives of their own. People spoke of the village not as a place, but as a phenomenon, a beacon for those seeking a more harmonious way to exist. But with this growing recognition came new challenges. As word spread, so too did the curiosity of powerful entities, governments, corporations, and other organizations that sought to understand and harness the source of the village's unique prosperity. Delegations arrived, bearing proposals to replicate the gardens, document the village's methods, and monetize the wisdom it seemed to embody. The village welcomed these visitors not with resistance, but with the same openness and curiosity it extended to all things. Elders like Adira and Kibo facilitated conversations that were neither defensive nor yielding, but deeply reflective. They emphasized that the essence of their way of life could not be commodified or reduced to a set of replicable steps. It was not a product to be exported, but a relationship to be cultivated. Many visitors left frustrated, unable to reconcile their goals with the village's philosophy. Others, however, stayed longer, finding themselves drawn into the rhythm of life there. Some even chose to remain indefinitely, contributing their unique perspectives to the ever-evolving tapestry of wisdom. The children who had grown up in the village's living gardens were now stepping into roles of leadership. Unlike the elders, their experiences were shaped not by the contrast between the old world and the new, but by a seamless integration of the village's principles into every aspect of life. One of these young leaders was Anya, a spirited and insightful woman who had an uncanny ability to bridge worlds. While deeply rooted in the wisdom of the village, she also understood the complexities of the modern world. Anya began leading journeys to urban centers, where she would engage with thinkers, artists, and innovators, sharing the village's philosophy not through lectures, but through collaborative projects that demonstrated its principles in action. In one city, she worked with local communities to transform an abandoned lot into a thriving garden that not only provided food but also served as a space for dialogue and learning. In another, she collaborated with scientists to study the plants from the village's gardens, not to extract their secrets, but to explore new paradigms of cooperation between science and nature. Anya's efforts began to inspire a new wave of movements around the world, where people sought to integrate the village's principles into their own unique contexts. These efforts were not carbon copies but adaptations, reflecting the diverse cultures and ecosystems in which they took root. Back in the village, a discovery was unfolding that would deepen their understanding of the interconnected world they inhabited. The magical gardens, it seemed, were not just archives of wisdom but active participants in the community's evolution. Researchers and villagers alike began to notice patterns in the garden's growth that seemed to mirror the emotional and intellectual currents of the community. For instance, during times of collective joy, the flowers would bloom in unusually vibrant colors. In moments of conflict or uncertainty, certain plants would wilt or grow thorns, as if reflecting the community's struggles. Elders interpreted these changes not as random occurrences, but as expressions of a deeper dialogue between the people and the land. This discovery led to new forms of interaction with the gardens. Villagers began treating them not just as spaces to nurture, but as partners in their journey. They would sing to the plants, write poetry inspired by their growth patterns, and even meditate among them, seeking guidance in times of doubt. The gardens, in turn, seemed to respond, their growth patterns becoming even more intricate and expressive. This relationship deepened the community's sense of interconnectedness, reinforcing the understanding that wisdom was not confined to human minds, but was woven through the fabric of existence itself. As the years passed, the village's influence continued to grow, not as a wave of conversion, but as a symphony of resonance. People in far-flung places began to discover their own ways of embodying the principles that had flourished in Adira's home. These communities were as diverse as the landscapes they inhabited, yet they shared a common thread, a commitment to living in harmony with the world, guided by curiosity and respect. Adira, now nearing the end of her earthly journey, found immense joy in witnessing this unfolding. She no longer traveled physically, but was present in every conversation, every decision, every moment of learning that took place in the village and beyond. Her wisdom had become a part of the collective, her name spoken not in reverence, but as a reminder of the journey they all shared. One evening, as the sun set over the gardens, casting a golden light that seemed to make the plants shimmer with life, Adira gathered the community. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of generations. "Remember," she said, "that this is not the end of the story. It is not even the middle. We are part of something endless, a conversation that began before us and will continue long after. Our task is not to finish it, but to keep it alive, to keep it growing." And with those words, the village continued, its story weaving itself into the infinite tapestry of life. As the years unfolded, the wisdom of Adira's village traveled far and wide, touching the lives of people across distant lands. Villages, towns, and even bustling cities began to adopt the principles of harmony and interconnectedness that had taken root in Adira's home. These teachings inspired new ways of living, where human activities worked alongside nature rather than against it. The once isolated wisdom of the village was now a global conversation. Leaders from diverse lands came to the village, drawn by stories of the magical gardens and the profound philosophy they represented. They sought guidance not only about the plants, but also about the way of life that had transformed a small community into a beacon of hope. Anya, now a respected guide, patiently shared her knowledge. "The world," she explained, "is like a garden. If we care for it with love and respect, it will bloom in ways beyond our imagination." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring leaders to take the lessons back to their own communities. Children, too, played a vital role in spreading the village's teachings. Their youthful curiosity and openness became a bridge between generations and cultures. Through stories, songs, and art, they carried forward the values of interconnectedness and care, ensuring that the wisdom of the village continued to flourish. Adira, though older now, remained a guiding light for the community. Her presence was a source of inspiration, and her words carried the weight of experience and insight. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the village, she gathered the people beneath the great tree that had grown from the magical seed she had planted so many years ago. Our journey has shown us the power of connection, Adira began, her voice steady yet warm. But this is not the end. It is only the beginning. Every seed we plant, every story we share, shapes the world of tomorrow. Her words sparked a renewed sense of purpose among the villagers, reminding them that their actions, however small, had the potential to create lasting change. Inspired by Adira's wisdom, the villagers committed themselves to spreading the lessons of the garden. They saw their role not as keepers of a secret knowledge, but as stewards of a universal truth. Through their actions, they aimed to create a world where harmony and understanding were not ideals but realities. The magic of the gardens, once unique to Adira's village, began to spread to distant lands. Each new garden carried the essence of its people, adapting to their unique dreams and needs. In some places, the gardens became centers of learning, where children and adults alike gathered to explore the interconnectedness of life. In others, they served as sanctuaries, offering peace and healing to those in need. As the gardens grew, so did the connections between communities. People exchanged seeds, ideas, and stories, forming bonds that transcended borders and differences. These exchanges fostered a new sense of unity, where diversity was celebrated as a strength rather than a division. The world, once fragmented, began to feel like a vast but interconnected garden, nurtured by the shared efforts of its caretakers. Travelers who visited the village often remarked on the profound transformation they experienced. They returned to their homes not just with knowledge, but with a renewed sense of purpose. These travelers became ambassadors of the village's wisdom, planting seeds of change in their own communities and inspiring others to join the circle of growth and understanding. One fateful year, a great storm swept across the land, threatening the gardens and the communities that had grown around them. Fierce winds and torrential rains tested the resilience of the plants and the people. In the face of this challenge, the villagers and their allies from far and wide came together, pooling their knowledge and resources to protect what they had built. They reinforced the gardens with barriers of woven branches and redirected floodwaters to minimize damage. They worked tirelessly, guided by the lessons of collaboration and care that had been their foundation. When the storm finally passed, the gardens stood resilient, their roots deeper and stronger than before. The storm served as a powerful reminder of the importance of unity and cooperation. The villagers realized that just as the gardens thrived through the interconnected efforts of many, so too could the world overcome its challenges if people stood together. The experience deepened their commitment to fostering bonds of understanding and mutual support. As the seasons turned, Adira's health began to wane, yet her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. One starry evening, she called Anya to her side beneath the great tree. The leaves rustled softly in the night breeze, as if listening to her words. "The tree we planted," Adira said, her voice both tender and firm, "represents more than my journey. It is a symbol of what we have learned together. Wisdom is not meant to be kept but shared. Promise me, Anya, that you will continue planting seeds in the earth, in hearts, and in minds." With tears glistening in her eyes, Anya nodded. She felt the weight of Adira's words, not as a burden, but as a gift. The next morning, Adira passed peacefully under the great tree, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The village mourned her loss but celebrated her life, honoring her by continuing the work she had begun. The village flourished, its gardens more vibrant and abundant than ever. The great tree where Adira rested became a symbol of hope and renewal, its branches stretching skyward as if reaching for the future. People from all walks of life came to sit beneath its shade, finding solace, inspiration, and strength in its presence. Anya, now a respected leader, carried Adira's vision forward with grace and determination. She reminded the villagers that the most important lesson was not just to live in harmony, but to help others discover it as well. Together, they continued to nurture the gardens and share their stories, spreading seeds of understanding and compassion wherever they went. As the seasons turned and generations came and went, the world blossomed with gardens and communities that reflected the spirit of Adira's village. The story of Adira and her people became a timeless tale, passed down through the ages. It reminded everyone that even the smallest seed, whether planted in soil or in a heart, could grow into something extraordinary. The end was not truly an ending but a beginning, a testament to the endless potential of love, learning, and unity. Adira's legacy lived on in every garden, every story, and every act of kindness, proving that the most profound changes often start with a single seed.